Top Gun Maverick is making copious amounts of money at the box office, as one of the more unexpected success stories in recent memory. But as is often the case, where there's money made, there's someone out there who feels cheated out of their share of that sweet, sweet cash. Which is why it should come as no surprise that Paramount, the studio behind the Top Gun sequel, is now being sued by the estate of an author who wrote an article entitled Top Guns, on which allegedly the original Top Gun film was at least partially based or inspired. So, is this another frivolous cash grab lawsuit, or is there actually some merit to the author's case? Stay tuned and find out on this episode of The Legal Download. In 1983, an Israeli author named Ehud Yoneh wrote a riveting article for California Magazine about the Navy fighter weapons school called Top Gun. The article was unique in that it was written in a style resembling a short story. It detailed the exciting process of flying a fighter jet. It had unique characters nicknamed Yogi and Possum. It told the pilots' stories, their motivations, and it crafted a vivid picture of what life in a real Navy fighter pilot school is like. At some point soon after the article's release, Paramount Studios purchased the exclusive motion picture rights to the article, and within 3 years, Top Gun the movie was released in theaters to worldwide acclaim. So here's the problem. If you've seen my previous video about Marvel and termination of copyright assignments, you know that the Copyright Act, Section 203A, provides for the termination of transfers of rights under copyright by the author 35 years after the date the rights were transferred. On January 23, 2018, the author's family, in this case, properly availed themselves of their right to recover the copyright to the article under the Copyright Act by sending Paramount the statutory notice of the termination. The termination was effective January 24, 2020. Well, what does all this mean? It means that after January 24, 2020, Paramount lost its right to prepare new derivative works based on the article, including a Top Gun 2. The key word is new works. This termination date does not affect prior release works such as Top Gun 1. Also, a key word here is that Paramount cannot prepare new works after 2020. But they can still publish or release such works that were prepared prior to 2020. So what's the significance of the word prepared versus created? Well, I believe this is because creation implies fixation. So if you performed a derivative dance choreography, but this dance wasn't recorded, you would probably not be creating anything for the purposes of copyright because it wouldn't be fixed in a tangible medium of expression, but you would still arguably be preparing it. Of course, Top Gun 2, aka Top Gun Maverick, wasn't released until 2020, well past that 2020 termination date. So the big contention in this case and the central issue is that the author's estate is arguing the film wasn't sufficiently finished or prepared prior to the termination date, while Paramount is arguing the film was all set for release, it was completely done, it was completed prior to that 2020 date. And all they did after that was release a completed film. So I think this is slightly interesting for a couple of reasons. First, when can you say a work is actually sufficiently prepared? For example, is a rough cut of the film considered sufficiently prepared? Probably not. What about slight edits added to a finished version or things like additional visual effects? Does sufficiently prepared only apply to the features of the film that are tied to the underlying copyright? For example, if Paramount made changes after 2020 that are purely cosmetic, such as changing fonts or credits, surely that wouldn't factor into when the film was actually finished under copyright law, right? Well, from what I can tell and from my research, the law isn't exactly clear on this. At least, I can't find the answer without using some expensive legal search tools, which I don't have access to at the moment. But intuitively, giving my best guess, I think the question might be whether there were any material changes made to the film after 2020, such as reshoots or re-edits of the completed film. If so, there's a strong argument to be made that the author's copyright was infringed. Now, I'm curious to see how this plays out because this seems like such a murky area. I'm also curious to know how far the court will allow this case to proceed. On its face, it seems like there are questions of fact, which should preclude the judge from simply dismissing the case. The questions of fact include whether Paramount actually made any changes to the film after 2020. It seems almost unheard of that they would let the film just sit there for 2 years completely untouched, as the more time you have, generally the better you can make CGI and special effects and things of that nature. However, this brings us to the second issue, which I think Paramount could try to argue to avoid that lengthy, expensive, and tedious fact-finding phase that they would go through. That issue is whether any of Top Gun 2 is actually a derivative work based on the original article. In copyright law, you cannot copyright facts. And you cannot copyright ideas. You can only copyright the specific expression of ideas. This is why you can have several novels written about the same events, or you can have multiple TV shows with superheroes that have X-ray vision and laser eyes and fly wearing a red cape. It's because the idea of a Superman isn't copyrightable. The specific expression of how Superman behaves and his interests and his character, those are copyrightable. I know it's a bit confusing because where do you really draw the line between what's an idea, what's an expression? It's a dichotomy that the judges and the courts often have to wrestle with. This is why we have Thanos and Darkseid, which sort of seem like copies of each other. Deadpool and Deathstroke, they were both based on each other. Hawkeye and Green Arrow, all characters based on same rough ideas, but different expressions of those ideas in DC and Marvel, the two competing comic book companies. So what aspect of a factually based article, such as the one in this case, is protectable by copyright? Well, probably not much. Take this excerpt from the article. You don't just sit and play the 2F112, you walk into it like an H.G. Wells traveler stepping into the time machine. You and your radar intercept officer climb up and strap into an F-14 cockpit mounted 20 feet high. At the center of a 40-foot diameter spherical room, the lights go off, and suddenly, the entire dome becomes the great outdoors. So the comparison of the 2F112 to H.G. Wells' novel would be a protectable expression. This is a unique way to describe this whole process. But the idea of a story featuring the 2F112 would not be protectable on its own. So were any protectable elements of the article actually used in the Top Gun movie? Well, I would argue it seems like nothing was based on the article other than the inspiration or the idea of a story about the Top Gun Academy. Again, ideas are not copyrightable. To be clear, the original article didn't create the characters of Iceman or Maverick. It didn't share anything with the films other than the ideas within, most of which were based on also uncopyrightable facts about a real Top Gun Academy and real people with nicknames, and all those things you see in the movie are somewhat based on facts. If you look at the credits of the original Top Gun movie, it's difficult to find the reference to the article's author, but somewhat tellingly, the credits don't say the story was based on the article. Instead, the credits strategically say, suggested by Yone's article. This is strategic use of credit language, and the Top Gun producers likely knew what they were doing by not using words inspired or based on. In other words, the author's family can't really use the credits as an argument that their original Top Gun was based on the article. In fact, it would seem the studio likely didn't need to buy anything from the author, nor secure any rights in the first place. So why did they even bother paying for something they didn't need to pay for? Well, studios do this for a few reasons. It's better to pay what was probably pennies to them to avoid having an author accuse them of stealing his story. They're basically paying for good PR and a good reputation. In some cases, this is also a good way to bring an author like this on the film with unique skills and knowledge as a consultant who might provide some feedback which gets incorporated into the script or provide pictures and background materials. But I'm not sure whether that happened in this case, considering how much reach Paramount has and how easily it could acquire these materials on its own. So ultimately, this might be a case where we will never get the answers to when a film is sufficiently prepared for the purposes of copyright law and derivative works, since I expect this case might be dismissed on the grounds of there not being any protectable copyright in the article that was actually used in the films. And additionally, that original material from the article probably wasn't used in the sequel, if it was used at all in the first movie to begin with. I'll keep an eye on this case and give you any updates if they prove to be interesting, but I thought it was somewhat curious and posed some interesting questions that were worth discussing. Until next time, this is Reels and Gavels.